Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris, for joining us today. Glad to have you here to speak on, the capabilities of IKS as well as ROKS. I just want to have you introduce yourself to the team, and we can go ahead and get started from there.
All right. Thanks, Randall. Hey, everyone. My name is Chris Rosen. I'm in offering management. I'm responsible for all of our container and microservices-based offerings in IBM Public Cloud. So today we're going to focus on IBM Cloud Kubernetes Service, which is IKS for short, and Red Hat OpenShift on IBM Cloud. Internally, we refer to that as ROKS. We don't say ROKS externally because it's not an actual acronym that stands for anything, and we don't want to confuse anyone and think that it's OpenShift on top of Kubernetes in some weird, Frankenstein kind of situation. So, but from here on out, I'll just say IKS and ROKS because it's much shorter than, the full offering names. I've got some charts that I'm going to go through and kind of start at ground level and then walk through the progression of how we talk to customers about the offerings and the pain points. And then I'll share the slides so you can take a look at them afterwards. But I'm really going to spend most of the time in a demo and kind of walk through how we use the offerings and then talk through the value prop and the differentiation within those offerings. And I know it's a little hard, being remote, but feel free to interrupt, ask questions if something's not clear. If we're going too fast or too slow, feel free to jump in. It's not going to hurt my feelings for you to jump in because we want to make the most of this time for you guys. And, so with that, let's get started.
Yep, and rookies, as you know, we want to make this interactive. So if you have questions, ask now. We have Chris on the phone, and he's the SME in this product. So if anyone is going to know, he is. All right?
Just not Chris Lamb. I don't have anything new for you, buddy. I've taught you all I know. So anyone else can ask questions. All right. So hopefully this is not new. As a part of the training, you've gone through the whole journey to cloud in 14 and 4. But the reason I'm sharing it is in the context of having that discussion and understanding where my offerings fit into that discussion. And it's right in the middle with Move to Cloud and Build for Cloud, both of those broader scope projects that involve our GTS and GBS and our hybrid sellers. IKS and ROKS fit into both of those broader sales motions. The other thing that I briefly want to touch on are use cases because, it's cool that we build out these things and, for all those of us that are technology nerds, we love new shiny widgets and tweaks and things that we're doing. But the reality is customers don't care about those things unless it's solving their particular problem. So these are the three main use cases that we created by sitting down with all of the CTOs in IBM across all of the various industries. So whether it's financial, healthcare, government, et cetera, and had them explain to us what are the problems that you're facing, and then it helps us tell the story of how to position our offering. So the first one is about innovation. It's really about being able to either disrupt in your field or avoid being disrupted and roll out new capabilities, whether it is security fixes or new capabilities, but to be able to do so in a very secure, automated DevOps culture and do that very efficiently. The thing that we find a lot is when we're talking to our customers, it's predominantly a culture issue. How do I actually implement these changes? The technology, that's easy. We can learn it, read some docs, and figure it out. But it's how do you transform your organization? And it's even harder now. Obviously, we're all working from home. So, let's fast forward to a time where, in theory, we can all get back together and work in co-located spaces. And it's getting those teams to break down their silos. And how do you do that? So a lot of times we'll bring in the IBM Cloud Garage to help with that, because it's not only, a technology discussion, it's how do we work together, how do we automate that entire CI/CD pipeline. And you'll see from the number of solutions, IKS and ROKS are prevalent here, but there's a lot of other things. So as you start having those discussions with your customers and you're saying, hey, I see you using some IaaS and some bare metal, well, look at some of these things that we have on the PaaS side that are truly unique and differentiated. So it kind of helps, start that conversation with the customers. The second one is really IBM's focus when you think about our strategic direction with solving hybrid and multi-cloud complexities. And there's things here, whether it's cloud packs, and we'll briefly touch on that, even though it's not really directly related to us and public cloud, but we should all be aware of it. Next week at Think, we're going to announce a new offering called IBM Cloud Satellite. For those of us that have been around and may have been at some of the fast start, you heard it by the names of potentially multi-shift, fleet, or armada. We finally landed on a real name. It's IBM Cloud Satellite. And that's specifically focused at this multi-cloud management. And we'll be able to manage IKS and ROKS, but also OpenShift running in your data center, eventually in AWS, Azure, Google, wherever your IaaS is running. So this is really, again, simplifying that multi-cloud sprawl with consistent operational tools, and with IKS and ROKS being, consistent foundational layers that would run consistently anywhere. And then the last one is about app modernization. It's fine if we're building cloud-native net new apps, but what do I do with this legacy or heritage applications that I've invested a lot of time in? And when you think about, the stats of 20% of workloads have moved to cloud, the 80% that's still remaining in those data centers, that's because that's the hard stuff. That's the regulated industry workload that they haven't figured out how to move yet. So that's where things like the financial services ready cloud with the Bank of America deal that we announced last year is very exciting, because that's opened up the discussion for a lot of highly regulated industries and customers to understand, what are we doing to protect that type of workload? Because if we can do it for Bank of America, we can do it for other workloads as well. So, and app modernization comes in a lot of different forms. Whether I simply want to repackage my app as a container, and now I've got benefits around deployment, automation, integrated monitoring and logging, but the app is still whatever it was. Or the opposite end of that spectrum is I completely refactor into microservices, and now I'm running in a cloud-native manner. And that's when you really take advantage of Kubernetes and IKS and ROKS and all the other things that are built into the platform. All right. So enough on kind of the setting the stage, the marketing hype around those conversation starters. Let's get into IKS. And I always start with IKS because ever since the Red Hat acquisition was announced and we announced the ROKS offering, I'm getting asked by customers, internal and external, hey, what about IKS? I've got a lot of production workload running there. Does that mean you're going to deprecate IKS and move everything to ROKS? The answer is no. From an IBM company perspective, obviously we're always going to lead with our Red Hat offerings, and in this case, OpenShift, because that's the strategic direction, that's the platform, that becomes the commodity layer that'll run consistently in any cloud. And you'll see there's some potential objections to ROKS. So, if you hit those, know that IKS remains a tier 1 strategic offering in IBM Cloud. So the same 99.99% SLA, the same compliance, you'll get all of that with IKS. Real quick, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, and I've said a lot of terms, so I'll do a quick definition here. Containers are basically a way to package up, your application and all of its dependencies as one thing. Now I can take that thing and move it and run it consistently in different environments. Some of us may be familiar with the situation where I deploy something, it works fine in my environment, it doesn't work in yours. Clearly, that's your problem, right? So that's why developers gravitated toward containers early on, is because it eliminated that. And it allowed you to focus at the application level and abstract any complexity from the underlying infrastructure. The second thing that I've said several times are microservices. This is basically a way to break down your application into small, distinct components. And each microservice handles one piece of the business logic. Now, microservices can run in other types of compute, whether it's Cloud Foundry or virtual machines, but they work really well with containers, because containers should also be a single process as well. So a lot of times people will think that microservices require containers, and although that's not the case, it's definitely a great compute choice. And container orchestration is how you handle placements of all those different containers, how you scale up, how you handle service discovery and DNS. So that's where Kubernetes comes in to provide that level of orchestration above all of these individual containers and microservices. So that being said, IKS is really about simplifying not only the day one deployment, but ongoing lifecycle management. So our customers don't have to be experts in Kubernetes. And it's great that we're building with these open source projects because our customers have that portability. They're eliminating vendor lock-in. If they get mad at IBM, I could take my Kubernetes workload and run it anywhere. Now, that's where we built in differentiation and we try and create that stickiness to keep them there. But the reality is they could take that container and deploy anywhere. So we'll talk about, how and where we run. On the lower right, you'll see some CNCF conformance testing. That just means that we're using upstream Kubernetes. The same CLI, API, all of your building blocks will work consistently here as they would elsewhere. And then, as I mentioned, compliance is very important. So things like PCI, HIPAA readiness, SOC 1, SOC 2 Type 2, GDPR, all of those things that are basically, outlining how we protect data and control access within the control plane side of our offering.
Chris, going to jump in with a question here.
Please.
Are there any differentiators between our IKS solution versus our competitors?
Absolutely. So there's a whole separate deck, and I can share all the links for everyone to go through. The way I create my content, and feel free to take a look at it, tell me it doesn't make sense, something else would work better for you guys, because I create a lot of content and I think it's all great until someone tells me otherwise. So I encourage that feedback. In the competitive deck, you'll see where we have differentiation compared to AWS's EKS or Azure's AKS or even Google's GKE. Things like industry-leading SLA with 99.99% SLA in our multi-zone regions. The best anyone else would provide is a 99.9%. So when it comes to availability, IKS is the best place to be able to get that workload. Things like compute isolation choices, including bare metal. The getting started is much easier. If you go look at Amazon, it's all CLI driven. There's no, point and click and add things. So once you've done it a few times, it's probably, pretty easy. But if you go in day one, it's daunting and overwhelming. You'll probably scrap it. We are the first public cloud to add support for the latest and greatest from upstream Kubernetes. We were the first to announce 1.17 when Amazon didn't even support 1.15 yet. The latest version they supported was 1.14, and that was end of life by the community, which meant there's no new security patches for that version. We're set to announce 1.18 on May 11th, and we will definitely be the first public cloud to announce support for that. So there's a lot of things that we're definitely unique and differentiated when we look at the others in this space. On the scale that we run at, we have over 22,000 production workloads that we're running in IKS and ROKS. The ease of consumability for other higher value services, whether I want to add cognitive capabilities through Watson or IoT or data or weather, all of that is very secure and easy to consume from your apps running within IKS.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Chris.
And I'll share all the slides. Yep, go ahead.
I have another question back to IKS. So I'm a rookie CSM new to IBM Cloud, so trying to learn all of this as fast as I can. And today's my first day, so I'm trying to hang in there. First official day. And so I know last week we had someone come in and talk to us about Cloud Foundry and essentially that it runs on top of Kubernetes. So would IKS be a lower level, like more detail, whereas Cloud Foundry would abstract a lot of that, like service discovery and orchestration type of stuff?
So Cloud Foundry comes in several permutations. There's Cloud Foundry Public, and it doesn't run on Kubernetes. It just runs in a multi-tenant PaaS offering. So The developer experience is much easier in Cloud Foundry Public because all I do is CF push my code and then it deploys it. Then the platform handles things like a domain name, auto scaling, all the operational characteristics for me. So from a developer, I love that. It makes it easy. But security and CISOs and operations, they're not going to like that model because they have no control. There's no workload isolation. Pepsi workload could be running directly next to Coke workload. So that's kind of a variation. Now, Cloud Foundry Enterprise environment, which runs on Kubernetes, is actually being deprecated. So I hope no one came to talk about that because that service is going end of life. But that runs in Kubernetes to give you all of the CFEs in an isolated Kubernetes environment. There's a new project called Caligo, which will get announced, I think, next week, and that's bringing serverless and Cloud Foundry and event-driven workload to one stack. So now instead of being separate pillars, I could run all of that in a multi-tenant stack with more isolation, but not as much dedicated isolation as you'll get in IKS or ROKS. So Cloud Foundry is a container-based solution. It's just a different container technology compared to Kubernetes or OpenShift, which is ultimately Kubernetes as well.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
All right, that felt very confusing when I explained it. When it just comes down to what are the customer's requirements. If they just want an easy developer experience, then Cloud Foundry may be the best. If it's a simple web app, then Cloud Foundry may be the easiest because Kubernetes is definitely complex. But the majority of users that are developers, they're not going to interact with Kubernetes directly. They're going to just do some push of code to whatever source code they're using, Git or whatever, and then that'll automate the pipeline and deploy ultimately into Kubernetes.
Okay.
And I think that some of the confusion came last week because it seemed like they were saying that the public Cloud Foundry offering was moving onto IKS. Something called like Irene or something, some project.
Yeah, so Irene it's to bring Kubernetes as the orchestration into Cloud Foundry, but it's basically replacing their old, I don't know, old, well, it's the older proprietary. It's gone through several evolutions from Diego to Garden Diego, it's evolved as Cloud Foundry, but it would use Kubernetes, but it's not running on IKS.
Okay, cool, thanks.
So I get how that is very confusing. All right, any other IKS questions before we move on to ROKS? All right, so you'll see ROKS is a very similar look and feel and value prop. The things highlighted in blue are distinctly meant and targeted for Azure, Red Hat, OpenShift. That was a joint collaboration between Microsoft and Red Hat in this managed OpenShift offering. When we announced the acquisition of Red Hat, from an IBM public cloud perspective, we needed a point of view. So for us, it's easy. It's just basically a cluster flavor type. Do I want Kubernetes or do I want OpenShift? For us to release Red Hat ROKS, it was very easy in the same consistent management framework that we have. So you'll see a lot of the value prop around simplified cluster management, day two operations, service integration, running in all 6 MZRs, over 30 single zone regions, all of the compliance, the SRE management, all of that's the same from IKS and ROKS. What you get on top of that is a native OpenShift environment, and we'll talk about that in a second. Let's see, the far right, because OpenShift, like I said earlier, being a commodity platform that can run anywhere. So how do we make it differentiated in IBM Cloud? And it's really that ease of using OpenShift and integrations to the rest of IBM Cloud to make it a better experience. So things like, so some of these are not there yet. We actually need OpenShift 4.4 to bring the key management stuff into ROKS. But, all of the Watson and the weather and all those services, using managed services like Sysdig and LogDB for monitoring and logging, we would advocate that here because even though OpenShift as a platform includes Elk and Grafana, no one wants to manage that garbage on their own. So use a managed service. You just push metrics and logs out to a managed service. You can create custom dashboards and alerts without managing the infrastructure. It's just think about moving that line of responsibility up so our users can focus on what's important to them, innovation, delivering new things, not managing, monitoring, and logs in OpenShift. I'm going to skip ahead. Okay. So this slide, very ugly, but it's meant to articulate when you think about a managed service, what is IBM Cloud doing on the customer's behalf? And we'll show a lot of these as well, how we can easily do them. But it's, again, just raising the responsibility for what our customers are responsible for. And because it's a managed service, we provide all of the tooling to do all of the life cycle, the updates, the upgrades, but the customer is responsible for determining when to actually do that. They control that because maybe, it's their busy shopping period or they're doing some other, testing or something. So they don't want an automatic update because in updates in Kubernetes, there could be potential API breaking changes as APIs get deprecated from the community. So we want the customer to be aware of that and cognizant of that. And if they built in any apps that are using specific APIs, to be aware of that before we just automatically upgrade and break them.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Avi here. So I'm kind of comparing this management, patch, application, everything from an IBM perspective, right? One of the big issues that's on the other side of our services offering, VCS, VMware stuff, I have 3 customers today that they cannot wait for the latest and greatest, and they break the automation and they go and apply codes themselves on patches on their environment because they have the root access. So how would this be stopped in this environment for them not to take action on their own? I guess this is as a service, right? So they don't have extra root access to the stuff, right?
Exactly. So I kind of skipped this chart, but you bring up a great point. So we give them the cluster admin role, which allows them to run privileged workloads if they need to in their OpenShift cluster. But we put enough guardrails and protection around the master side because it runs in my infrastructure account and it protects them from breaking changes to the API or SED, which would then break the cluster. So that's the difference in a managed service versus a do-it-yourself, or even OpenShift on VMware is a do-it-yourself. It's not a managed service. So there you could deploy new things, you could break things, One of the things that we're working on is giving customers the ability to make more changes on the API side without breaking it. So giving them more leeway, even though it's a managed service, if they want to change, scheduler configurations or different things. We don't quite have that figured out yet, but that will get them closer to be able to turn more bells and knobs and whistles without breaking themselves as well. So it's a fine balance there. All right, so last week we announced that ROKS would support 4.3. That was quite an engineering shift from 3.11 to 4.x. From an OpenShift in general perspective, what does that mean for you and for our customers? Because you'll see there's a substantial price difference in ROKS compared to IKS. So why am I going to pay more for OpenShift? One, obviously, it's that consistency. If I'm running OpenShift on-prem, I've got the same tools now in the cloud as a managed service. But all of these things here, right? So it's access to Operator Hub. Operators are a way to build in operational knowledge to software. So whether it's Red Hat content, IBM content, certified ISV content, Operator will simply, simplify the deployment of that software stack, say a Jenkins tool, and updates as it's running. So now I don't have to worry about updating Jenkins I'm just worried about above the line, the code that I'm pushing into that Jenkins pipeline. So operators simplify software consumption so our users, again, focus on what's really important to them. They continue to focus, and they being Red Hat, on the developer experience. So that's things like the OpenShift service mesh. This is based on Istio, which is an open source service mesh. Rewind to think about where I talked about microservices. When you have 1, 2, 10, it's pretty easy to maintain that. But as your architecture grows in complexity, and now I've got 100 or more microservices, you need a mesh that sits above the container orchestration layer and gives you insight into the individual microservices. It allows you to set policy where maybe microservice A can talk to B, but it can't talk to C. Or you want to set mutual TLS encryption between the different components that talk to each other. And that's where Istio fits in to be able to provide that insight. And again, Istio is an open source project that was launched by Google, IBM, and Lyft about 3 years ago. So now Red Hat is bringing that in as a part of OpenShift. And the reason it's called a service mesh is because it's not only Istio, but there's some other things like Kiali, which is a way to visualize Istio, and some other tools as well. So that's where the OpenShift mesh comes in. The next thing is serverless. So again, as my architecture complexity increases, maybe I've got some components that don't need to run all the time. So they're just sitting there waiting for some trigger, some event to take place. And when it does, then I run something else and take some action. And that's where serverless, based on the Knative project, comes into play. So now I can run Kubernetes and Knative in one stack, one developer experience. And then the last thing are these code-ready workspaces. So if I bring on a new developer, I give them access to this workspace, and now it's got all of the developer tools that they need, all the plugins, the Eclipse, the GitHub, all of the tools to get them up and productive as quickly as possible. So here are, you'll see that this is actually consistent across IKS and ROKS when we talk about these things. I'm going to talk about these in the form of a demo as opposed to more slides, but I will fast forward to quickly touch on Cloud Paks because a lot of, and the reason I bring it up is a lot of IBM Cloud workload, especially ROKS, is running Cloud Paks. There's a huge push to bring Cloud Paks. We've got some special offers going on where we're giving away 1 year of infrastructure to run a Cloud Pak. So depending on the size of the Cloud Pak, it could be worth upwards of $270,000 worth of ROKS that we're giving the customer to run that. And then in that year, we obviously want to create value and benefit and stickiness, so that way on day 366, we're just rolling around in money. So that's the premise of these offers. But a Cloud Pak is basically a way to modernize the traditional IBM middleware software stack, and to be able to run that in a consistent way on any OpenShift distribution. So obviously, if I'm a software seller, I want to be able to run this Cloud Pak in IBM, AWS, Azure, Google, anywhere consistently, on-prem. So that's what the Cloud Paks do. They just require OpenShift, and then they'll run consistently in any of those environments. Today, there are 6 Cloud Paks. Each one is really targeted for a specific use case or business situation. We won't go into all of those right now. But if you think about, Cloud Pak for data, it's not actually running databases. What it does is introspect your existing data lakes and run analytics and help you make decisions based on the data that you already have. So that's kind of how these Cloud Paks are meant to fit in and help with, existing workload or building new workload without necessarily having to scrap what you've already invested in. So again, all of those run consistently. So how do we differentiate and make it best and easy and most optimized to run those in IBM Cloud? So all of the things that we talked about with ROKS around compliance and bare metal and all those things, that's true. But we've done a few other things specifically for Cloud Paks. The first thing is that we launched the IBM Cloud Catalog. This improves discoverability. It brings software as a first-class citizen within IBM Cloud. So now I can easily find any of the cloud paths. The second thing is around simplifying deployment. Through something called IBM Cloud Schematics, which is our infrastructure as code offering, we can automatically deploy that Cloud Pak software into your existing ROKS cluster. Now, there's a lot of ugly IBM gorp that goes into that because we basically go out and check with something called Passport Advantage, which that holds all IBM software entitlement. So if customer A has purchased Cloud Pak for data, we would go out and we would know that. So now you can automatically deploy Cloud Pak for data into your ROKS cluster. If I was not entitled, if I had not purchased Cloud Pak for data, I couldn't just deploy that, freely on my own. We are working with the Cloud Pak teams to bring a trial user experience into the cloud as well, but that's a separate discussion. So now we've...
Chris?
Yep.
So just to make sure I understood you, so when a customer buys ROKS, Passport Advantage will go out and check if they have like QRadar, for example, and then they'd automatically see access to the Cloud Pak for security?
Well, you picked one that hasn't added support for IBM Cloud yet. Cloud Pak for security is not there. The other 5 are there. But yes, so based on the actual part numbers that comprise the Cloud Pak, that's what the entitled registry is querying to find.
Okay, wanted to make sure I understood. Thanks.
Right. So then, which is a great setup for this slide, when you have that entitlement, and you'll see this in the demo, you'll see this little thing here that says, apply my Cloud Pak's OpenShift entitlement to this cluster. Because by default, I'm just going to deploy ROKS, I'm going to pay for OpenShift, and then I'm going to deploy my Cloud Pak, which I purchased, which includes OpenShift entitlement. Theoretically, I would double pay. So if I deploy my Cloud Pak to ARO or to OpenShift dedicated, I'm paying twice for that OpenShift entitlement. So only in ROKS can I basically zero that out to run that capacity for my Cloud Pak. So if you're entitled, and all of us IBMers are, so you'll see that little checkbox here. If you're not entitled, you wouldn't see that. Now in the catalog, you'll still see all of the Cloud Paks, you just won't actually be able to deploy them unless you have the entitlement.
So I'm assuming, Chris, that this would be a more complex exercise for a customer wanting to run this on Amazon, IKS.
Exactly. So in that model, you purchase it during the normal, in IBM Cloud, it's all bring your own license. So you have to go through whatever the normal motion to purchase the license. Then you need to download those images, and they're huge. I mean, yes, they're containerized, but there's a lot of parts. They're very big. Download that, install it. I've heard upwards of 2.5 weeks to deploy a Cloud Pak in a do-it-yourself manner. Whereas with schematics, we automate all of that for you. Now, we still need to keep fixing the the success ratio, but it's pretty good and much easier than a do-it-yourself.
Gotcha.
All right. Let's see. So hopefully the resolution is not too bad here. And
it's great.
You can still see my screen. Okay, got it. So I'm logged into IBM Cloud dashboard. Again, hopefully this is not the first time you guys have seen this. I'll go into the catalog and we'll go through creating a cluster and then we'll look at what's already deployed. So on the left-hand nav, let's take a look at software first, since that's what I just talked about. Here I could filter on Cloud Paks, and I can see the Cloud Paks that are available. When I go back up to services, I can filter on containers, and here I see IKS, ROKS, and IBM Cloud Container Registry, which is kind of a sister offering that stores all of your static images. And with the registry, we also have Vulnerability Advisor, which will introspect every layer in each of those Docker images for known vulnerabilities. So now as an administrator, I could set a policy to warn or block users from deploying images that have those vulnerabilities. So let's take a look at IKS. When I come in here, I could deploy a free cluster. That's less exciting, so let's just go with standard. In the IKS flow, you'll see that there's always an upgrade path to OpenShift. Whereas if I go in just to the ROKS tile in the catalog, you won't see Kubernetes and IKS. Because again, we're trying to nudge people down the ROKS path. Under the version, I can pick the things that I want to support. As I said, I'm whitelisted, so I have access to everything that's out there. Most users won't see 1.18.2 yet, but we can use that. Under the environment, so this is basically the infrastructure. I won't get into a long diatribe around IBM Cloud IaaS and some of the deficiencies, but just note that today there's classic infrastructure, and there is new VPC or virtual private cloud infrastructure. So it's a bit confusing. The customer would need some preconceived notion of how and where they want to run that workload. But basically, you would pick classic if I have other BSIs or bare metal, and I want to deploy that to the same VLAN and have the same connectivity to those other resources. So I'm going to give it a name. CSM demo seems appropriate. Resource groups are a way to segregate different things, whether it's an IKS or ROKS or other resources that we deploy in IBM Cloud, to different teams. And you can see that if I deploy this to this Portworx resource group, only users that have access to that resource group will see it. So if I'm running a multi-tenant account, I can then keep access and connectivity separated between those different resources and different users in my account. I can also add a tag, which will help me find it later, so we'll call it demo. Under location, this is where I could do a single zone. So based on the geography, I could pick any of the over 30 single zone regions that I support. And if I need to deploy to Seoul, what will happen is we'll deploy the masters and workers in that data center. Your traffic doesn't leave. So if you have geographic constraints or GDPR or other concerns where data residency is important, you can pick a cluster in this particular data center knowing that the data will not leave unless you allow it to leave. Now, because I didn't have any VLANs, it would create some on my behalf. Let's go back and check multi-zone.
Excuse me, Chris. Can you select North America just for the, when you do North America, if a customer has, say, in Dow 13, some VLAN that is operational and they are working, can you select that VLAN and then deploy this or
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So in multi-zone or single zone, it's the same premise. It's right now it's going out and querying for VLANs that I have. If I had multiple VLANs, it would list all of them here, or I could go into the backside through the IaaS, create a new VLAN if I wanted to keep this IKS cluster separate from other stuff.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Because if there are centers that they're not on the list, then we get into VPC, transit gateway, and all that mess. Okay, go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead. Thank you. Yeah, it's a different story.
Yes, the complexities of software IaaS.
Yeah, you're doing something at Delta, so that's why.
Oh boy, Delta, very top of mind. A lot going on there. So
yes,
we can take that one offline.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right. So in this multi-zone cluster, as I said earlier, we're going to put masters and workers across these 3 different data centers. So again, if Dallas 10 has some catastrophic network outage, the API is still accessible in 12 and 13, and my workloads are still running in those other 2 data centers. By default, we have private and public endpoints. If I wanted a completely air-gapped cluster, which basically means no outbound connections on the masters or workers, I could do that and say private only. Now I need some, whether it's a direct link or some connection into the IBM backbone, but in this model, it's completely air-gapped, and I can run new workloads, I can deploy things, I can extend my on-prem network to IBM Cloud, but I can't get to it from the outside world. So that minimizes the attack surface of that cluster. A lot of our customers really want that isolation. I'll put it back to both. And then under my default worker pool, I could filter on the left-hand side. Like I said, we've got bare metal as a part of the managed service. Virtual shared is, just think of any cloud virtual machine where it's a single tenant VM, multi-tenant hypervisor and hardware underneath it. Dedicated compute, it's single tenant virtual machine, hypervisor, and hardware. So I'm the only tenant running on this physical hardware running an IBM cloud. So again, just comes down to the isolation choice that you want. I can pick whatever flavor. If I have too small or too large, that's no problem. I can add a second pool later and delete this original one. By default, we use Lux encryption on the second disk where all of the containers are running. Each worker node has a unique Lux encryption key. If I were running some high-performance workload, I could deselect that and run that use case if I wanted to. And then I can pick the number of nodes in each of these zones. So as I scale that up or down, it's going to evenly distribute across Dell 10, 12, and 13, the number of workers. And then the last thing, I own this account, so obviously it's a good sign that I have all of the necessary permissions to actually deploy this. And then I would click create, and it's going to go off and spin it. But let's avoid that for now. I'll quickly jump back to ROKS, and it's not going to be, dramatically different, and that's intentional. So you can see here the default is 4.3. We still support 3.11 if you needed that for some reason. Everything else is the same. VLANs, obviously you'll note that we don't have VPC support yet. We are targeting Gen 2 support at the end of May. Unfortunately, that there's a bit of risk in that date because IKS was supposed to GA on Gen 2 end of April, but we found some issues in the underlying IaaS storage. The team is trying to fix that. The IaaS team, once they fix it, then IKS will be able to test and GA. Subsequently, ROKS will be able to GA as well. But eventually, you'll see the same choice of classic versus VPC infrastructure. But everything else is the same. Encryption, nodes per zone, and then here is that entitlement check. By default, we're going to make you purchase additional OpenShift. We're not going to assume just because you're entitled to a Cloud Pak that you're going to use this cluster for the Cloud Pak. If I knew I was, then I would say, yes, apply my OpenShift, and then that goes down to 0. Then I would click create. So very easy, very, click and point. Obviously, I could automate this through the CLI or schematics or something else if I wanted as well. Let's take a look. Yep.
Chris, just to jump in here, in regards to the deployments, we had single zone as well as multi-zone, but both are still highly available, correct? I mean, with a single zone, you just deployed spread across one DC, and then multi-zone, you just spread across different DCs. Is that correct?
Correct. So we always deploy HA masters. They will just get deployed to different nodes in Dallas 10, for example. Now, if one node becomes unhealthy, one rack someone kicks the power out or something, you would still have instances running. If the entire data center goes offline, then that's another situation, which is why the IBM Cloud SLA distinguishes between the 99.99% SLA in an MZR and a 99.95 in a single zone.
Yeah, Chris, one quick question on bare versus virtual dedicated. They practically act the same, right? From a tenancy perspective. Okay.
Yeah.
Why would I choose one versus the other one then? Why bare metal versus dedicated virtual?
Bare metal would essentially get you a few things that you're not going to get in virtual.
Okay.
One, it's going to eliminate the hypervisor. So even though the hypervisors are pretty performant, you will get a slight performance increase by bare metal.
I got it. Yeah. Great point.
The other thing, 10 gig bonded Ethernet is a big one in Classic because in BSIs, you're not guaranteed anything more than a 1 gig NIC.
Right. Yeah. I always wondered. Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, so now in my cluster management overview, because I went in through the Kubernetes view, I can see IKS and ROKS clusters. But again, if over here I went in through OpenShift, I would only see my ROKS clusters. And that's very intentional on how we keep that separate from a UX perspective. So once I'm in here, let's pick this guy. So as I go in, and this is going to be very consistent from IKS or ROKS, you'll see the same kind of overview information, pertinent information. If I have an issue and I need to open support, I would have my cluster ID. I can get some health and utilization. That is a quick view. I can look at worker nodes. So this is where I'm going to do that day 2 life cycle. So if I wanted to upgrade, assuming I had already updated the masters, I would just select all of them and say update. Now, what will happen, like I said, we'll take worker 1, we'll quarantine it by draining all of the deployed containers, all the deployed pods from that node. Once everything's moved and up and running, then I reload it top to bottom. That's where you get operating system patches, Calico, Containerd, Kubernetes, anything in the stack. When it's back online and healthy, we move on to W2, so on and so forth. So it's a rolled, controlled way to roll through that upgrade. And I, as an end user, don't have to be an expert in Kubernetes or know that, when that new version of Kubernetes is released, IBM has already done all of the testing to make sure it's performant, secure, operational. It doesn't break any of the other open source components in our IKS stack. Under the Worker Pools tab, this is where I said earlier that if I created the wrong size, I would go in and create a second worker pool with a different flavor if I wanted to. And it's, again, very similar look and feel. Add-ons are, think of these as managed components as a part of our managed service. So if I wanted Istio, even though it's a part of OpenShift, we could also have a managed Istio component within IKS. So I could install that, we simplify the deployment, all of the updates IBM would do on the customer's behalf. Another thing that I'll point out is this diagnostics and debug tool. Once I have it installed, then I could go and open this dashboard and run different tests, whether it's against Istio or different Kubernetes components in my cluster. That'll help me troubleshoot and figure out whether it's application level or infrastructure, something's wrong with my actual Kubernetes or OpenShift cluster itself. So you can see on the left-hand side the different types of tests that I want to run. If I wanted to run some network tests, I could select that, say run, and it's going to come out and test it. So now I can see that all is good with Calico. Calico is an open source project, which it handles my network overlay within my cluster. So it's just a way to help enable our users to make it easier to troubleshoot and understand when things are happening in their cluster. And then the last thing is this DevOps integration. So because I already have DevOps tools, tool chains, and pipelines deployed into this cluster, they show up here. And it creates a nice synergy from our DevOps tooling managed in the cloud to IKS and ROKS. So now I could directly look at, this tool chain. I could look at, my GitHub, my issues, my delivery pipeline. I could see how that deployment is actually happening in this IKS or ROKS cluster. So this is just a sample, very simple pipeline, but it's going to go through every time I change code. And this is where the developers, like I said earlier, engage with IKS. It's not in there running kubectl commands necessarily. They're pushing code to GitHub, which then triggers a new build, then it containerizes it, then it deploys that. I could also add another stage in this pipeline for Vulnerability Advisor, which would basically provide that security check, and I could completely stop the train if we found a new vulnerability in that new image that I just built. So let's jump back out.
This looks great, Chris. I had a question. It looks like you're we got 5 minutes left, but if a customer is using IKS and they're in production, they're comfortable with it, would it be beneficial to offer ROKS, or is it kind of, is there any added benefits there, or would it just confuse the customer? I don't know.
So there are some technical differences between, in Kubernetes, you use ingress to define your customer-facing apps. In OpenShift, because OpenShift was around before Kubernetes supported ingress, so it has this concept of route. So it's slightly different. There are different annotations. It's a different user experience. So generally, we don't see users bounce between IKS and ROKS. That being said, it's pretty easy to move that workload and redefine it in an OpenShift manner. So the value really comes from what's built into OpenShift. So I just switched over to an OpenShift cluster, and I'll open the OpenShift web console, because that's really where the value lies. And it's things like authenticate, things like Operator Hub, or the developer tools that are built into OpenShift. That's where the value lives as far as getting people to jump from an IKS to a ROKS. Now, whether or not they see all the value and think it's worth that investment of paying the additional cost, that's really going to be up to them. But here I could see from an administrator view, obviously I don't have a lot in this cluster, so it's less than, super exciting. But I've got some things built into it. We've got the built-in monitoring. If I wanted to run my own stack with Kibana or Grafana, I could do that. As a developer, I would see things like, this is where I could see my builds, my pipelines. The downside here is these are all in this specific cluster. So if I want a pipeline or monitoring or logging that live outside of this single cluster, then I need to use a managed service that sits kind of above that line. So that's some of the nuanced differences. Now, going forward, there'll be a more clear distinction between IKS and ROKS. As a part of the Bank of America deal with that financial services cloud that I talked about, ROKS is the only offering that will get FedRAMP certified. So if you need that level of compliance, ROKS is going to be the only place for you to get it. Another thing that'll be different, if you need Windows support, that'll only come through ROKS. We're not going to do that in IKS. So as we progress, there'll be a clear line of when you would want ROKS versus IKS. Now, we're also working with Red Hat. We would like some concessions from them to create a clearer on-ramp from IKS to ROKS, and for it to all be Red Hat based, but we're not quite there yet. So that would also simplify that discussion as well.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, can you? I know we got a minute left. Can you touch base on a available demo labs that you have? We can take advantage of.
Sure. I can find the link as well since I have 4,000 tabs open. And I think this is it right here. So basically, DTE has created, and I say DTE, but basically my team created this. If you've used something like Katacoda, it's basically a great way to get hands-on. I don't want to launch the lab because that'll count against me, but in this, I basically have the tutorial on the left and then the console on the right. So that way I can run commands and get familiar with things. So I'll definitely share this as well, Rambo.
Yeah, that's on IBM Cloud/demo, right?
Yes, this is the new catalog that's not been released yet because they're just adding support for 4.3. In the demos page, you'll only see 3.11 right now, but I think it's fairly imminent that they're going to launch these new ones.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I know we covered a lot pretty quickly. I'll send you guys the materials. As you think about it and you have questions, feel free to reach out through email or Slack, and glad to follow up as needed.
Chris, is there a public Slack channel for us to reach out to, or should we just reach out to you?
You could probably start with directly to me. Whether it's how to find something or how do I do something. My Slack is just @Crosen, CROSEN. And then if it's more of a, hey, something broke, then I'll punt you in the right direction.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Chris. This was very educational and I think very beneficial, even for myself. Lots of nuances coming down the pipeline, and great to see some of the progression in regards to ROKS. Because previously, when we heard about it at Fast Start, it was it's up and coming, starting to get started. So lots of improvements, and hopefully we can start steering in the right direction. But thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Rookie,
thank you.
Want to go and
Thanks,
give
Chris.
Chris thanks?
Yep. Thanks, Chris. It was great.
Yeah, thanks. That was great.
No problem. Thanks, guys. Bye.
That's very helpful.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.